should have had that on. And thank you, Gillian, for coming on behalf of a mother from Lytton High School. So we have 2 deputations in a moment, but we'll just go through our minutes or any declarations of interest. So having opened the meeting, to my knowledge, we have no apologies. Is that correct, Ms. Con? Yes. Right, thank you. We just move to, do we have any declarations of interest? No. Then we move to the confirmation of the non-confirmential minutes. Thank you, Mr. Burdett. And that's on page 5, the minutes of the last meeting, which was the 3rd of December. It's been moved by Councillor Burdett, seconded by Councillor Worsnop. All those in favour that I sign the minutes as true and correct record, please say aye. Contrary, carried. Thank you. Are there any questions or queries with respect to those minutes and matters arising? No. I have a couple of things marked up as far as progress, and maybe Ms. Spate, you might be able to answer them. It's on page 7 and relates under item 10.1. The 3rd bullet point, the interim ticketing scheme currently being investigated for the box recovery, which is an item later on our agenda. Are you able to talk to us about, my comment to me was what progress has been made with that uptake? You're saying it's part of a strategic review. Do we know anything more than what's in front of us? What do you want? Sorry, thank you. Mr. McIntosh?
That's okay. Through the chair, that is a council project that is still in progress, my understanding. They're still trying to confirm, or there is budget that's been confirmed through the LTP process, hopefully to investigate that as a potential project.
It says here it's currently being investigated, so you're saying it's not yet started.
So there is already discussion with the consortium, the regional consortium, and they're on exactly what the costs of that ticketing system would be and how the uptake would work. There is a potential that we could join on the back of Hawke's Bay's contract and things like that to reduce the costs for us. So it is being investigated currently at the moment. Still.
Okay, welcome, Mr. Tupera. We've only just begun and we're on the minutes of the last meeting. And just on one further item of update on page 9 and the first bullet point around the issues around looking to formalise a no right turn into the Esplanade, and it says there's a plan to reseal the surface and there's a trial running on and we're still waiting for outcome from the trial. So can Pokeka Tahi tell us anything about the outcome from that trial? I know the Mayor has a particular interest in that because those temporary barriers have been there for some time.
Through the chair, yes, the update is that we are proceeding with the no right-hand turn, which the council has supported us in that approach, and the tender is out at the moment, and it will definitely be completed within the next 3 months.
Thank you very much. That's really helpful. So what you're saying is it will be formalised to become a no right turn. Thank you. That's great. Councillor Burdett, can you please use your speaker?
Page 9, the 5th statement down, the Kainanga resistance is around the access way to Waimatatini, given the resilience issues with the Kainanga Hill, the Waimatatini can be often cut off, blah, blah, blah. I note in the long-term plan, there's a huge figure there in terms of resilience. What concerns me after reading this and listening to some of those people over there, we continue to do what we've done and maintain access to and from the Kainanga Hill. Council has just spent, I think it's 180,000 putting dollars at the foot of the Kainanga to protect the road. So I just hope that the maintenance work will continue. They're not going to shove it to one side and start exploring a bridge.
Is there anyone in the room that can answer that, or shall we wait for Mr. Wilson to return? It's not a project within your scope.
Was,
No, that resilience project is a proposed improvement project, as you say, for to look at options, and it's quite far out in the long-term plan. It wouldn't impact the current maintenance projects, the current maintenance of the network, because that would sit in a separate operations and funding bucket. So that, any improvement activity is not directly competing with the operations funding.
supplementary, Madam Chair, we recall those of us councillors, and most of them were with us on the bus when David Wilson pointed out the proposal was, and a suggestion at the time, that it come off Highway 35 across the river, opposite Waimatatini. So I just wondered if it's gone any further.
But just as Ms McIntosh has
I
just
just heard
said,
that, but
but that is a fact, Councillor Bird, it's a long way down,
Yeah.
the LTP process. It is in the LTP, so it hasn't gone any further, I think is what we're saying right now.
Yes, and it would also add that, when it starts to progress, require a business case, the full business case approach to that project to look at all the various options and the costs and benefits. And so there is no proposed change to the current road and that maintenance operations.
Thank you. So we move then, if there are no further queries or matters arising from the minutes, we move then to the action sheet. Any queries with respect to the action sheet, page 13?
Position hasn't improved much. Emma would probably be aware of that. And there are regular complaints about stock on the highway. And I'm just wondering whether we should have a special session on this and ask for the party to come with some plan of action.
Would you, Ms. Spate just spoke to me before the meeting. Would you like to speak about that now or within your report?
I can speak about that now. And we are actively working with the community. We've been having meetings involving ourselves, WorkSafe and the council on the range of actions and things that we can do. Obviously, we remain concerned that obviously stock owners have to take responsibility for their stock. And we have seen a drop in the reported wandering stock, but obviously that could change again if those behaviours aren't maintained. So we will continue working with the community. We've got another meeting scheduled in 2 weeks' time, and we are looking at some additional signage and more communications right across the region about this issue. So we are working, and we're working in partnership with the council on this because it is something that we're all concerned about. But ultimately, it is the owners of those properties and the stock that need to take responsibility for it.
Just pass me that. We'll put you there. Thank you. Oh, we understand. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Cranston.
Yeah, the other item about the engine braking there, it says a due date of the 1st of February this year. So we've got a date for that coming.
This is the
That's the engine braking.
Can you comment on that?
As my understanding is the engine braking provisions are being investigated as part of the traffic and parking bylaw. So when we're looking at the draft bylaw, which is sort of, the timelines for that have been pushed out because things like the engine braking and the heavy vehicle freights have been pulled into it. But that's currently being investigated now.
Could we have an update of, just can the Secretary record, we could have an update for the next meeting, please, since we don't meet every month. Thank you. So we have no request for leave of absence, no acknowledgements or tributes, and so we move to our public input and petition, and we welcome residents of Makarori Beach to talk to us about beach safety issues and beach degradation, and thank you very much. I welcome Sandy Ball and Robin Busby and whomever else wishes to come up with you. Thank you. For that big gentleman, please bring another chair up with you. Thank you. Come, go. Thank you. No, council officers will turn it on. It's all done for us. No, please join us at the table. Thank you. So I'll leave it to you to organise who speaks with respect to which bit.
I was going to go first. I was going to
So that's not what you want up first. All right. So could we please just have?
It's not set up to roll. Oh, okay. Okay.
Perhaps you could press the button.
Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Broderick. Apologies that circumstances have meant that people have arrived at different times today. We are just on item 6, and this is a public deputation with respect to road safety issues on State Highway 35 and degradation to the dunes. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you, Pat, for this opportunity to speak. Our issues are shown with photos and a video, which includes dune destruction, vehicles on the beach, and one vehicle with children hanging off the sides of a moving vehicle, dumping of rubbish, beach and highway accesses, drains, signs, other council's protections, and our town's protection. There is also a video of motocross bikes on the beach. So the first point I wanted to make is vehicles on the beach. We would like to see a bylaw to stop all vehicles and motorbikes on the beach for the safety of beach goers. Children are unpredictable and you don't always hear a vehicle due to the noise of the sea. Also, council acting upon the current bylaw infringements by motorbikes regarding excessive noise. The second is designated parking areas. At present, vehicles are choosing to go wherever they like over the dunes, causing irreparable damage. During the winter, the off-roaders are using the dunes as a playground and also to prevent more rubbish dumping. The third one is state highway entrances and exits. Transit needs to fix ASAP the entrances and exits. One in particular is extremely dangerous due to huge, large dropouts. There are far too many unsafe entrances and considerations needs to be given to stop future public-made entrances. Council and Transit need to work together on this, as the recent boulders placed by council have caused more damage due to the barrier not being installed by Transit that was supposed to be. And finally, I don't want to get up here and say all the things are wrong with the beautiful place that we live in. I'm here because I live at Makarori and see the good side and the bad side of what goes on. I'm not here to work against anyone, but I'm here to work together as landowners to find solutions to the disrespect some public are showing again and again to Makarori. Thank you.
Thank you. As a point of explanation, I think those latter photos, Mr. Ball, are from Mahanga and Mahia, and you wanted to make the point that the dunes are well protected.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah.
They're Mahanga and Mahia. That's Mahanga, 120 metres from the road to the sea, or many miles down there to the bed.
Can you speak to the next one, Sandy?
Oh, sorry, Pat. Yeah, that's looking back to Mahia, the same. There's a wealth of vegetation there. Specifically, it gives protection to seabirds, nesting birds, and the size of it is just incredible. When you think of that going all the way down to the Murphy Lagoon like that. In some places it's wider than that where it's away from the road. No vehicles are allowed on that on that for you. Whereas at Makarori, we're just getting a bog hole. Last winter had to be seen to be believed.
This is our telephone cable being taken out.
That's Makarori.
Yeah. This This is new damage from last year. This is entrance way that's too steep. That's more new damage from last year. Same area, more of the same. This is homes on the beach. That's just driving along the bushel.
There are 10 of those, I call them illegal entrances and exits from 4 June onto State Highway 35. And vehicles are coming up like that. The vehicles, heavy trucks coming through, I'm told some of them weigh up to 60 tonnes with trailers. And these vehicles are popping up on the road from 1 or 2 legal access points at the north and the southern end of the Whakaori beach. But all these ones along the middle are terribly dangerous.
These signs are actually quite hard to read, believe it or not. It's quite close up. They're quite small.
That photo's quite close up.
Yeah, they're very small. I put this sign up myself personally. It says so vehicles beyond this point. I had a good weekend, but I don't know if it'll last that long. You can't, it's really hard to take a photo to get the gradient, but you know, so the council have put these rocks in, and we agree to it on proviso that transit would block the entrance way going down this, and they never have, and so this is what's happened since those rocks were there. And as you can see in the foreground, they're now driving around in front of the tree and coming around.
Just for the benefit of everybody, that there is privately owned land by the Busby family on Makarori beachfront. There is council owned land and there is whānau land.
Yeah, that's another steep coming up. And these are cars on the beach, regular cars on the beach. Count up to 24, 25 on any one time of the weekend.
So my name's Gail Dalton and I'm a Makarori resident. And just to support Robin with the State Highway 35 access, all the different accesses, it's probably about 10 now. So that's coming off now an 80-kilometre high crash area, signs are everywhere. I walk the beach every morning, and so since basically lockdown ended, Makarori's the place to go. It's a wonderful place for families and everybody really. And so now I'm counting over 20 accesses from the dunes onto the beach side, because that's where I'm staying. So and every day there's new tracks humping over, because it's just so flat. You know, you look there now and it's just completely flat. So I acknowledge that the council have done some work here in the trees, and kind of looks like it should be a park there now, that whole Highway 35 Makarori area. However, the sand dune vegetation is actually gone with that now.
If you go back to that last photo, that's directly outside our house, and we agreed with the council to use that for parking under the trees. But the problem with that is that it's going to get very wet. It's going to get very wet when it rains. I'm just going to bog again, so that's going to be another area that's going to go.
So it's kind of, you go downtown beach, it's beautiful. It's all walkways, sectioned off. Signs don't work at Makarori. The 10th site and the one looking vehicle, you know, not allowed, but everybody so that means anybody else in a vehicle will be, you know, that looks anything different, and they don't, they've even moved the boulders.
Pat, if I could make a comparison, please.
Thank you very much.
For the councillors, thank you for the opportunity to speak. Pat. All I think Makarori are asking is what the Aussies call a fair crack of the whip. All the other beach reserves, starting at Waikanae, right through Wainui, Makarori, Leisner Reserve, vehicles are stopped from going onto the beach. Everybody else can go and walk and swim and surf. And They can't drive onto the Dune and can't drive onto the beaches. There's been millions of dollars spent quite recently at Waikanae, a very big new job. Makarori is great. It's got about 5 parking areas and they're properly bollarded. You can't drive onto the beach. And I think that's probably what has to be done. I'm suggesting a Makarori this summer, because if we get a repeat of that mess last winter, and probably coming from the conservation aspect, I've been involved with conservation for a long time and worked for the Wildlife Service Conservation Department. That's the nesting habitat and the habitat of seabirds, and they're just getting wrecked. Other beaches, particularly I know Hopi, Pat knows it well, tremendous lot of effort gone into protecting the wildlife, nesting seabirds, that sort of thing. And to come along the beach on a motorbike or whatever you're driving, if you're allowed to, just really bad news in wildlife terms. I have asked Doc to put in a bit of effort, but so far nothing really has happened.
Because we have time limitations, would you like to talk to us about the survey that you did? Because I think that's quite relevant, Mr. Ball. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Pat. Just my own little survey, and I know that the figures are available through NZTA, and maybe some council staff. I've tried to look them up, but I'm getting the run around and said, well, we'll take 5 or 10 days to tell you how many vehicles use State Highway 35. On the 5th of this month, I ran an hour survey and I ended up with a total of 154 vehicles in 1 hour. Of those, 35 were heavy trucks, logging trucks, stock trucks and those sorts of things. Today I did it again. I think I probably should go back to perhaps 5 to 6. And today it was 326 in that same hour. It just gives an indication of just what barreling up and down the coast every day. And as Robin has said, popping up out of the side of the road are vehicles that are coming up off the Dune. So there's a tremendous danger factor in there, and I'm really looking at NZTA to put up some barriers, proper barriers. No, I don't mean barriers that will stop the people going onto the beach, but similar to Okatū perhaps, which has got 5 parking zones along its length, plus a surf club at the other end. So the danger factor is there, and I think NZTA with their high crash zone starting on the Okatū side of the hill, going right across and right up to the Makarori village entrance, great big signs. I think everybody here has seen them, high crash zone. And it's, I know in the past there have been nasty crashes. There will be more unless NZTA match up to the task. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Phil Evans from the Makarori Residents Association. Just wanted to add in that in addition to these issues, we have decided as a community in the community meetings we've had that some support for a walkway, cycleway to continue from the one that's at Wainui, that can probably start at Okatū and following the road, the headland and the foreshore of Makarori, maybe even to Tatapuri. It's really just a concept at this stage. I've met with the Gisborne Cycleway Trust and want to continue to work with them to build a concept to push forward. But if there's other planning going to be around accesses and limitations to vehicles on the beach, then it just felt it was important to raise that today. But I'll be working with Gillian and her group to try and bring this concept forward with a little bit of detail. But certainly I was involved with the Wainui one, and given the success of that and how that's performed, we'd see that rolling that out even further would have the same level of success as they've had at Wainui.
Thank you very much. Thank you. The process is we can't debate the issue today, but we can, councillors or members of the committee. Sorry, we can't debate the issue that you have raised with us today, but we can have questions asked. So I will put it to the committee that they can ask further questions and then we can take it back. Sure. Sorry, there's one more video.
Is there sound on the video? Is there any sound on the video? Oh. Oh, yeah, well,
We did see the bike while you
yeah,
were here.
unfortunately, we didn't get the noise. Never mind.
So are there questions to the submitters? Thanks. First, Councillor Cranston.
Very familiar with the area and absolutely share your concerns. There's two parallel problems here. You've got the beach and the dune area both getting damaged. My question probably goes to staff in a way. Because it's the old coach road, it's a paper road, and are there issues with getting a bylaw done in that area on the basis of what you can do on a paper road, existing paper road? Is that problematic for?
So through the chair, the issues that we're having is around the status of the road, where it used to historically sit, but then also which is the correct tool to bring it back. It's something we're going to review as part of the traffic and parking bylaw is around what we can do. So we have taken that in as part of the review for that bylaw around where we can prohibit vehicles from being on the beach. So it's part of that process that's already underway.
Supplementary.
Oh, sorry, supplementary.
So the paper road's on the beach, so it wouldn't matter with the forging. Would that separate it? Or?
So through the chair, we're specifically looking around how we limit speeds and vehicles onto the beach, because there are still legitimate users for people launching off the beach, those kind of things. So we do need to take those into account. So this is around speed management and vehicle management on the beach, where we're talking around the difference between the sand and the road. To differentiate them through there, we have to look around the reserve management plan and what are the inputs that we can have. And we have been working with Waka Kotahi as to which are the interventions that we're able to do, and then looking at how we can align those with funding should it become available, because we don't have anything available at the moment between either of us.
Can we just ask whether there'll be some report back, because there are some members of the community think nothing has happened since the meeting of the 28th of July last year. So when will the public get any idea of the discussion?
Can I get back to you before the end of the meeting with that? Sorry, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. My apologies for being 5 minutes late. I thought I was on time. Phil and I had the privilege and honour of playing representative rugby together back in the day. I have to say, physically, we looked a little bit different then too. But look, I support your concern from a conservation perspective. Absolutely, that area needs to be sorted in that regard. It needs to be preserved or protected. But I have a question for the council through you, Madam Chair. Did I hear that right, that from the state highway to the water, that area is owned by the council? Who owns that area?
So through you, Madam Chair, there are a number of multiply owned parcels of land through there. So there are some that are in private ownership. There are some that is between NZTA and council, and then there are other parts that are Māori land that are through there as well. So it's not contiguous to titles that run along through there.
Okay, well, thank you for answering that. But also going back to the concept of the cycleway, because there's opportunity, given that I've just heard for the first time in Councillor next door to me is quite right, it is the old coast road, so there's a lot of history there. And of course, there's the Māori history as well. So with what you're planning to do, there's opportunity for storyboards and all sorts of things to not only enhance the area, but also it just serves more notice to people, hey, this is a special place. So I would support that. My only question I have, I guess, for us as a committee is where to next on this. So in terms of debating or responding to what's been presented today, what's our process? Do we just email in our thoughts? Is there a staff member who's assigned to this particular matter to follow up with the local residents? What's the process going forward?
So through you, Chair, we will be looking to bring a paper back around the speed. I'm more than happy to commit to a paper once Waka Kotahi and Council have agreed our way forward between us. I say as I look at the speed at the same time. So it's around us being able to present something back once we've got something to report back, once we've been able to work through the issues that we both need to.
Thank you for that. So just a supplementary question in regards to what happens next in the short term, because winter's coming. What can be done to, given what we've just seen, to at least put in interim measures to protect that area? Because as it mentioned earlier, we don't want to see what we've just seen happen again. Is there an interim short-term fix that can be introduced now in anticipation of winter?
So I can only speak through the chair. I can only speak on behalf of council for that part. We don't have any budget for doing anything along that space in this financial year that we sit in at the moment.
Thank you.
Yes, certainly, you can make a comment.
Thank you for that. I think there's two facets to that. One is that bearing in mind that NZTA classed the whole highway there as high crash, they could, as they have done in other districts, notably Bay of Plenty and Hawke's Bay, a barrier on their land, stopping vehicles from going over the side, which in many instances they have done. One on the Makarori Hill, where they could erect on their land, I'm suggesting the steel poles and the two meat cables, or at least in the interim, block off the entrances and access routes from the foreshore onto State Highway 35. And that needs to be done ASAP if they're to be believed that it is indeed, we believe it is a high crash zone. With due respect to the cyclists, even worse, coming over the hill. So hopefully that.
Thank you, Mr. Ball. Do you want to comment, Ms. Spate? Well, I mean, it isn't normally my habit to comment on something that's in front of on the agenda, but I'm just going to say, in defence of Makarori, that degradation happened last winter, and we don't want to see those access ways allowed to continue so that it can happen again this winter. And I mean, I pass it every day, and yesterday, because the surf was great, there were people parked all the way along the beach. We do need to, I understand that will be part of a management plan, but if you look carefully, NZTA can see where several years ago they put some temporary barriers, which were quite cheap, railway irons and a couple of posts over some of those access ways. There's a couple left there still now with grass grown over them. Now, it can't be too hard to do that if nobody's got money for proper barriers or poles or rock or whatever. But I just don't think we're fulfilling our obligation to protect the environment if we allow it to sit like that for the rest of this year and get worse. So thank you very much for coming. I can't do any more today because we have rules around our process. Are there no further questions from the committee? One from Mr. Burdett.
And really, having listened to the arguments and suggestions, is it feasible to put bollards down there?
Well, nobody's got any money for them. We've just heard that, Mr. Burdett. Nobody's got any money for
You
them
don't
now.
understand, but that's the
But that's a
question I'm
planning
putting on the
thing.
table. Is it feasible to
Just
put
to
bollards
speak.
there because you, as David has said, there's sprinkled in there, there's private property.
Yeah, but it's not a negotiated process. We haven't even started it yet.
Yeah, could I just mention there, NZTA could do it on the roadside, which is their land, at their cost, and without the rate payers having to come in there. But money, talking about the management plan, the Makarori management plan was set up 10 years ago. Nothing has happened.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ball. We really appreciate it. Thank you, Makarori. Thank you to the rest of your team that came in to support. We appreciate it. It is an issue, and you can rest assured we will keep our eye on it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. leave those, passed a few of those around. Sorry
Great,
about
thank you.
that.
No, we'll keep in touch. Thank you. Now, I'd like to invite Mrs. Ward, who's coming to this afternoon to present on behalf of Mother from Lytton Road. Just a little background to this email request that's been around for a while with respect to volumes of traffic at Lytton Road. Thank you. And there's a PowerPoint presentation. Can you just move a little closer and then your voice is captured? You don't have to bend down, but it'll be captured by them. Thank you, Jim.
Speaking on behalf of Raven Foreman, who can't be here today, who shared her concern with the heavy traffic on Lytton Road in the vicinity between Taruheru River and the Gladstone Road roundabout, where Aberdeen Road crosses through. It's a busy place when before and after school, when parents are dropping off school kids to many schools in that region, and it can be very hazardous crossing the road for school children. Rowan's suggestion to Councillor Seymour and Mayor Stoltz was to create a path under the Lytton Road Bridge on the hospital side, where I think there's been a historical path, and Rowan and I did some work clearing a path a year ago, but it's a little bit rough and not of a state to be promoted to school children's use, or it's got a rough surface and trip hazards. If the council was able to spend a little money in making that a formed surface and easier to use, it could potentially be part of the Taruheru River cycle walkway, which, as Councillor Seymour mentioned, is in the future, but that perhaps could be brought forward and that would make a safer under the road crossing in the meantime.
Are there any questions to Mrs. Ward? Thank you, Councillor Cranston.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just seeing this for the first time, but I'm just wondering, I know that intersection's getting really problematic now. What are I know we're quite proud of only having a couple of sets of traffic lights in our town, but traffic lights with a lighted pedestrian crossing there could happen a lot easier than a bridge, going under the bridge. Is that an option? Because that's where the bulk of it would be.
There is a path under the bridge already. It might be, I'm not sure, that just might be quite easy to make the path a little bit safer and clearer.
Mm.
Certainly that's something to think about.
Thank you very much. We will keep it under review, and council officers, could you please let to know that the council officers have that email trail. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Ben. Right, we then move to the agenda items. We have no request for extraordinary business nor notice of motion. So our first paper is the draft regional transport plan, which is to be approved for consultation, but it needs to be approved to be forwarded to council, and then council actually adopt it. So there's a change to the wording and the recommendation. So over to council officers. That item starts on page 15.
Oh yeah, and 16 is the recommendation, which, as you say, is recommends to council for approval. Sorry about that. I don't have much in the way of introduction to this. You will see on your table, we have some amendments from Waka Kotahi that are to
Everybody's
the
got the
proposed
page that was tabled.
activity tables. That is just some additional information that was sent through today to fill in some of the gaps that we're still waiting on information. There's no major changes that they have signalled from that. It was just some additional information that was added. Otherwise, I'm happy to take questions or comments.
Or responses, or suggested amendments. Mr. Gilmore.
Just on page 22, just on climate change, it's mentioned about the emissions from transport and the impacts. Like New Zealand's, well, the whole country's taken bring front foot on the emissions, and we're now, heavy vehicles are now Euro 5, Euro 6, so theoretically, the air coming out of the vehicles is cleaning the air going in. Is that so much of a factor now, or is that taken into account?
Through the chair, the emissions profile for transport from our region based on the current the current volumes of traffic is actually the regular cars that have the highest emissions, is my understanding of it. And we do recognise that, you know, with the new Commissioner's climate change recommendations coming through and things like that, the push will be really for electrification of the transport fleet. It has been assessed through Waka Kotahi and their sort of national view that transport emissions is not, for Gisborne is not a very high emitter on the national scheme. It's not a very high priority for our region, although it is, we would probably refute that for ourselves in terms of we want it to still be, you know, to be considered, and especially when we're trying to make the case for projects like walking and cycling and public transport, you know, when we're applying to a national fund. So
what you're asking is, should it be domestic transport is the key contributor? I mean,
Through the chair, this is something that's set as part of the assessment that's been done for our region around our climate footprint as a region. So understand technology's come a long way. However, for us in our region, transport is still a significant contributor when it comes to the regional emissions. So whether it be public transport, private transport, whether it be goods going in and out of the district, it's something that does still come up high when it comes to our footprint as a region.
thank you. Other questions in the room? Councillor Cranston?
Yeah, thanks. Page 61 and 62, and the question probably slips into the next paper in a way. We've got those budgeted figures there for 680 for bus services and another 310 for infrastructure improvements on bus services and that, which is a fairly big number. We're doing the public transport strategic network review. Is the purpose of the review or any function of that review to drop that number down? Because as it says in the next paper, it's a very underutilised service, you know, so.
The purpose of that review is more to optimise that funding. So to work out why that is underutilised and how it can be approved, like whether the service is actually meeting the needs of our community, and what we can do to improve, you know, make people, well, to encourage usage of it across the district, or across the city. There are the emerging technologies like the on-demand services, for instance, that could potentially work in a region like ours, with a small footprint, and that's what the aim of that is.
I think it's also important to note that this is an area that's government priority, is to provide a mode neutral transport system and to look at opportunities to provide access to the transport disadvantaged as well. And so it is an important part of an integrated transport system to be looking at what opportunities exist. Obviously, we do want them to be well utilised and efficient in terms of how they operate, and the new types of services are providing some options there. But in terms of the overall regional approach, I think it's really important to continue to look at where public transport can support people and contribute to reducing emissions and more efficient transport and supporting transport disadvantaged.
But if it's being less utilised, should we assume it isn't meeting people's needs now?
So through the chair, part of the study that we're going to undertake is looking at the use of public transport and what are the barriers for people moving to it as part of our review of our operating framework and where those buses are going to be. So the big push for this next 3 years is to make sure that we have got that balance right and reviewing what we can do to make it more attractive for people to pick it up. There's a lot to be said around smaller feeder routes that then come into the larger loop routes that have got going on at the moment. So the team have been looking in other areas at smaller buses going to smaller areas to help feed in, to help make it so it's where people need to be at the times that they need it to be as well. But it's just working through our community as to what that looks like.
Just a supplementary, sorry, come to you. Is that NZT, ours and NZTA, is that funded at the far rate? No, I should know that, but I didn't.
Yes, so public
Is that the
transport.
same- The same far rate. Mr. Gaddam,
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, just the amendment, Spate. I note for the Eastland Port access, my bugbear, that while in the 10-year total, there's 2.1, there's actually nothing, there's only 400,000 across the first 6 years of the plan. I mean, and also I find it intriguing that the estimated 10-year total, because they're obviously 3-year blocks for the National Land Transport Plan. And we've got a 10-year total, which is kind of weird. Might have a 9-year total because it'd be 3 cycles, but anyway. But I guess my biggest issue is that, and this relates to some of the other projects to be fair as well, is that in those out years or the next stage, there doesn't seem to be anything in the funding stream for them. So the way I read that, it says that the port access, which this group elevated as a priority project in the last meeting, hasn't got any funding attached to it outside of consultants between now and 2027.
Yeah, so until we've completed the design work, we can't fully budget for the rest of the work. So there has been an estimated amount included. And once that initial work's done, then we can look at whether we need to make an amendment to the RLTP to reflect that.
So, but there is an estimate there. By default, we've got an estimate because it says the estimate. So why wouldn't that number be, and this again, this relates to some of the other projects, why wouldn't that number be included somewhere as an intention to carry out that project? Because optically, it looks like this project's not going to get carried out. It says it's going to spend some money consultants, and then we'll get a number which may or may not be bigger than the $1.7 million that we have got left theoretically at that point. But it doesn't look like it's not on the plan to get done.
Well, that is the nature of the way that the funding is planned for. So we do need to ensure that we get those updated figures, and then we can confirm both the timeline and the amounts through an update to the RLTP.
I mean, if that's the system, that's the system. It just seems, it doesn't make a lot of sense to a layman like me that, even that we have projects all the time that we will budget amounts for, we may not know exactly what, but at least people gives a visibility of roughly when the project might commence and roughly what the cost may be, accepting that there's prelim work for a lot of the stuff that will need to be done to nail that number down. But I guess at least it shows intention of completing those projects. If that's the way that Waka Kotahi do it, then I guess that's the way it's done.
is the port company involved in the, or consulted during the design phase in Spain?
Yes, there will be.
Thank you. Ms. Worsnop and Councillor Worsnop, and then Mr. Tupou.
Thank you. I've got a handful of points because.
Can you refer to the pages?
Yes, I can. So because we're talking about optics, I have some concerns too about how some of this is going to be picked up in red. My concern largely, I've raised it before around our significant projects and their prioritisation. And it sort of bothered me before, but having read the entirety of this and what we're putting out, suddenly I went, oh my God, that looks really bad. We've got 3 pages, page 45, 46, 47, detailing what safety means to us. one paragraph of that refers to cycling, and yet our top 3 projects have cycling, meaning, 5 for safety, 100% it's safety. That's not consistent with those 3 pages and what we say our safety issues are. We say it's our surfaces, we say it's our corners, we say it's our driver behaviour, we say it's a whole bunch of things that sound to me like the State Highway 35, where we know people are dying quite a lot, right? What kind of message do we send to their families if we put this out and say our top priorities, 1, 2, and 3, don't involve your road at all? I think that sends a pretty, I get some of the answer that came back to Andrew here around the fact that a lot of what Waka Kotahi does is send signals and indicate things and send messages via different kind of alluding to different things. But our it's our ratepayers and the population of this region that we are answerable to. And while, yes, we don't want to upset the hand that feeds us, I think that, the people that are directly affected by this also pay their rates. And as a result of that, I think we need to be much more aware of how we are allocating our priorities. If you want a really high priority for cycleways, attach it to reliability, for goodness sake. No one can be too offended with that. It's hard to have an unreliable cycleway. So my second point was around the definition of an investment partner on page 51. Does that mean that they are contributing funds, or they are somebody that's consulted? What? Because it's attached to all of those in the subsequent pages.
Is that 51 of the agenda or 51 of
it's 50 page, 51 of the agenda.
Through the chair, yes, my understanding that is a heading that was in the template for the RLTP template that was developed through Waka Kotahi and the special interest group. And so that heading, my understanding is that it is potential investment, like actual contributing funds. But it could be, I don't think there has been a definition provided.
It shouldn't be read to believe that they've put some skin in this game, if whatever it refers to.
Oh no, that's how I had interpreted and what is included in here. So when it says things like the forestry industry, they have contributed to some roading costs, through
privately as opposed to through their rates. Is that what you mean?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that was a clarification I was after. Thank you.
and port company is contributing?
Yes. So that would apply to everybody who's considered an investment partner.
Yes.
Okay, cool. But yeah, did anyone want to respond to my first point?
On the safety one, so if you look under the Road to Zero activity class listing, which is on page 59 of the agenda, what you see there is a significant program of investment that is on the state highway, looking at what we call the low cost, low risk program. So that's all of those sorts of activities exactly that have been identified in the text. And so we have infrastructure, we have speed, and then we have some specific projects that have also been identified, and there's also the local road components of those. So those are definitely in there, and they have been prioritised in relation to the risks that exist on this network.
My point is less about what's in there, because I can find it, because I've sat through this, and it's more about the fact that this document is now going for consultation. So it's for other people to interpret what we've put down. And there's nothing else in there with priorities attached to it. So you're drawn to that in terms of what's most important to council. If we had not attached that list, you'd be fine. That's the issue to me, in terms of if you're looking to try and rank what council thinks is most important, that's the only thing in there that tells you that. So it's optics. It's less that I think we shouldn't have it in there. It's that the interpretation of what we're putting out there can be interpreted in a way that maybe we don't want it to be.
So just to clarify for process, when we go up to public consultation, we have a consultation document that sits alongside this, which is comms team will probably kill me, but it's the short version that everybody reads as opposed to the big long version like this, which only special people like us make sure we pour over the detail of. So the part of it for us is around how we have that key messaging, because a lot of the safety spend is actually safety and design. There's a lot of things where we're doing our maintenance or we're doing capital upgrades where we'll make our roads safer through our BAU budgets. So that's a guiding principle to how we have our designs for the fixes that we do on the network. So how do we make our roads safer? So absolutely hear your point around showing the safety component through that consultation document, but that's where we really engage with the community and highlight those priorities outside of the VXL spreadsheets with all the information that are inside them.
Just supplementary to that as well, I agree that the legislation, it asks us only to prioritise the big new projects, so only those large improvement projects that are over $2 million. And so it does miss all that BAU stuff and also the safety, the smaller individual projects. I acknowledge that in this draft, I haven't put some good wording around that prioritization table in terms of what it is actually showing, and also the fact that those priorities don't necessarily compete with each other because they're coming from different funding buckets. So I have seen some, since writing this, some good examples from other regions around how that is described for their consultation material, and I've been taking that on board for the summary document.
Mr. Tupera and then Councillor.
Kia ora. Firstly, thank you, Mr. Wilson and the people involved with putting together this plan. It's comprehensive. I like the detail in it, and I have to say, when I first looked at it, I was very impressed. So well done to you folk, and you've obviously put hours of work into this thing. And I tried to compare it to the last plan, and I could see where you haven't just cut and pasted it. So congratulations on work well done. I've committed, just for the record, for this committee to continuing to work with the staff regarding providing a multicultural overlay, not to integrate or to remove any of the detail, which once the public consultation is completed is finalised. It's really just to enhance. So I'll continue to do that. And also similarly, given the climate change thing, now that Trump's gone, it's a big deal now, always has been, but it's a really big deal, to provide a environmental overlay as well. So how is that going to be done? To assist me, I'm just forming a small group of people, tangata whenua, to work with me, to work with the staff. And similarly, I've got a few people in the environmental area who I can have a 5-hour coffee break with, and they'll no doubt feedback into me to work with the staff. So just to let you know in terms of the process going forward, I would support, other than what comes out of today's hui, in principle, that that this plan goes to the council. The reason being, and then onto the public, subject to what the councillors decide to do with it, the sooner the better. Having said that though, my understanding of this plan, once it's completed and signed off on, however that might, whatever that might look like, is that really it's a document that can be taken to the government. It's almost like a profile. It's like a business plan you take to somebody to get some money, that's my understanding. But I do know also that within the detail of the document, as we drill down into the different areas which have been touched on already, there's work still to be done. And that's how it works. So in terms of waka kotahi, yes, and I take the point that my colleague, Mr. Gadam has mentioned. Yeah, there are some parts, there's detail there are indications, but actually no, with all due respect, no substance to the indication or detail around that, and I get that. But my understanding is that that side of things, the operational side of things, will come. It's important though, as a general principle, as we all know, is we need to get the real stuff into the initial plan though, somehow. So the points have been raised already. Public consultation, that detail needs to go in. Because that's, as we all know, if it's not there, we'll never be able to implement that. So it's got to be there, and it's got to be to the extent that, for example, Mr. Gadam referred to. So those are my initial comments, but thank you very much for work well done to your team, Mr. Wilson and the rest of you.
Thank you, Mr. Gadam.
I'm going to labour this point a wee bit, but the safety aspect, we've got $17 million against that for 10 years. Absolutely nothing in the prior years associated with that. So, and then no narrative as to why there's no, I mean, I understand Ms. Spates' comments to a degree, but we haven't got any narrative that says why there's nothing in there. So when I look at that, and if I'm Joe Public, I think $17 million in the never, never, but nothing planned in 6 years. And it doesn't ring true. We're not going to win any favours by putting that type of thing out. If there's a strong narrative around it, I could probably be slightly more palatable, but this is the kind of table that people will pick up and read, as opposed to all of the written words. No offence to all the hard work that's gone into it, and I appreciate there is a lot, but this is just the kind of thing that will get pulled out with no context and get questioned.
Can we have an answer to that, please?
Well, under the road safety activity class, there's over 39 million budgeted for the next 10 years. So there is a challenge here that there are different sets of information in the 4 or 5 pages there that show the activity classes and then the significant new activities, which is a specific category of projects over $2 million. And so because a lot of these are parts of national programs or under the low cost, low risk category, they don't specify all the individual sites and locations of where those things will happen. So, you know, there is a significant investment in safety. It is the government's priority, and it's certainly something that we're looking at really carefully and wanting to work quite very closely with this community on. So we do have to encourage the people commenting to look at each of those tables together so that they get the full picture, because otherwise you're only getting a partial picture when you look at the significant new activities table.
Can we put some words around that then that say that? Because it's just a bit isolated at the moment.
Is there going to be time to tweak this between now and go to full council? But that's not people read.
Yes, there will be time to incorporate any recommendations from or changes from this committee before council, which I think is not until the 18th of March. And because it's going out with consultation with the long-term plan, that is not begins the 22nd of March, I think. So we've got quite a lot of time between.
Are you clear about what was being asked then to be added?
I think we'll have to work with the agency around what the wording is, given it's their funding that we're talking about, and then incorporating that into the document so we can work offline.
Thank you.
With Waka Kotahi on that.
Are there other comments? Mr. Councillor Cranston, yes, sorry.
Yeah, thanks. Page 63, we've got walking and cycling, and we've got Tarahia River Walking and Cycleway, and starting in the next few months, I suppose, if we look in 21-22 year, we've got 365,569, and over the next 4 years, we've got 7.4 million. What is the and I suppose the colour red's telling me something, but what's the likelihood of us spending that 365,569 next year and progressing this project?
So through the chair, the Tarahiru needed to be put into the RLTP in order to be able to attract the share from the National Land Transport Fund. So if it's not in here, we don't get any funding from the NLTF. The funding would be for the first year at least is around, if we're successful, so that's from July. So if we're successful, that would be around the resource consents and the planning for that walkway. If you check in, so the cross part is that the GDC share is externally funded. It's not coming from ratepayers. So that's the proviso for that walkway, is that the local share will need to come from external funding. It's not coming from rates.
Are there any other comments? I'd just like to make a comment about what I'm on 46 and then going through to 70. Seems to me a disconnect between the issues around our high death and serious injury numbers. Per capita, it talks about how we perform poorly, we're much greater than the national average. And it talks about the reasons why, and I'd be interested in please comment on that, since that's the reason you join us at the table. But all our comment doesn't seem to be addressing the issues that we raise about alcohol and in some instances drugs. So we talk about and unlicensed drivers. Now, we know a lot of work is being done by police and community agencies about making driver licenses more accessible to those who live remotely in this region. But if you actually just look at that paragraph, summary of evidence, and then look over to page the healthy outcomes and the measures we're going to put in place, you can't tell, I can't see where there's any connect around some of the issues that are causing our death and serious injury are going to be addressed. And so do the police have a comment on that, please? Because some of the issues are issues that fall into your accountability.
In terms of what the police are doing in relation to the crash risks, is same as or similar to the RLTP in that we prioritise the highest crash risk causation factor and the highest crash risk areas. So that's our deployment plan. Fortunately, I can probably tell you now that we are replacing our, for want of a better term, the booze bus with two smaller and more mobile vehicles in May, and that will give us better deployability to risk because we'll be more mobile. We're still working through the finer detail of how we will resource the vans, but work in progress, but we expect to be able to be more mobile, more visible, and increase the likelihood of people getting caught drinking and driving. So it creates additional problems down the pipeline, and if you're catching more, there's more in the courts and so on and so forth. And what do we do with them to keep them out of the justice system? But we can work through that with our colleagues in the Maori fraternity through the Pai Oranga programs and so on.
And one of the statements here, a high proportion of crashes where casualties were thrown from the vehicle compared with the national average. So
Yep.
what was being done about education on the use of seatbelts, and how persistent are the agencies whose responsibility that is to doing that work? Because, you know, fixing the road is one thing, which this committee is dealing with, but there seem to me a number of other issues that are impacting on our crash numbers
So
that we're too afraid to talk about.
The Road to Zero approach is actually looking at all of these factors, and I'm picking up a new role working with New Zealand Police on them actually, once I transfer out of my current role, but it is a really important part of what we do is to look at all parts of the safe system, and so that's why we have roads and roadsides that we look at with the safety programs that we've been looking at and talking about. But we also have the vehicles, because we have a high proportion of 1 and 2 star vehicles in this region. We have the need to substantially change, and we are looking at what we do with, and particularly in this region, working with the council and through the road safety coordinators, and also thinking about how we target directly to rural communities and work in partnership with iwi differently. So this is us looking nationally and saying we actually need to work closely in the regions where we're seeing those particular patterns, because the existing body of work is not creating enough change in the communities where we're still seeing these behaviours. So we are working on that, and Road to Zero has given us a really clear directive to take more action and really target our activity. But we do know that visibility policing, for example, and increasing the public perception that if they drink and drive or speed or do other activities that they shouldn't be doing with their vehicles, if people have a high perception that they'll be caught, then those behaviours go down. So there's really strong evidence around that. So we do need to just pick up the evidence and use the police evidence-based policing model, but then also work with communities about how we do shift this. So it is something we're looking at. We are really keen to work really collaboratively here in Tairāwhiti because of those challenges. And but we just haven't got that program bedded in yet, but we are talking to council staff, and we know there's a lot of interest in working
Well, you're not going to achieve
change
your
it.
road to zero unless you do some of these other things as well. So it'd be really
Absolutely, and the
interesting
whole model
to
we've got
report
now
that
does
at
that.
our next RTC meeting, what you've actually achieved and what your plans are. I mean, the communities do some things for themselves, like try to get the driver's license issue, which is a big issue. We've had people come to this committee about the fact they can't have driver's license tests in Wairoa and have to travel to Gisborne, and it doesn't happen on the coast. So work is being done by the communities to help themselves, but we need to know what resources are being put in there to improve those situations.
So through you, Madam Chair, that'll come as part of the quarterly report from Lifeline. So in Lifeline's, Waka Kotahi pays for a FTE to work in my team that does the driver licensing. Is actually really heavily funded by both Waka Kotahi and GDC. So we are partnering with police around rolling that out on the coast. We also have our recidivist drink driving program that we run. We have all of the bright green billboards that hopefully you've seen over summer, and then also targeted campaigns into schools. So we have a full report that will come to show you where that investment is. And it's something we've beefed up our reporting on for both Waka Kotahi and for this committee around explaining how we spend that funding.
Great, thank you. Councillor Worsnop.
I just found my one other question. There is a graph on page 50 of the agenda that I hadn't seen before, and I would like to know where it's come from, and I guess have added to the notes around that the fact that the pavement surface actually has a huge impact on rural people's lives as well. Because even if the road is open, if it's completely diabolical, they tend to be very angry people and have miserable lives. So just noting that concurrently we've got an improvement in the pavement integrity index of urban roads and a corresponding decrease in rural roads. And the fact that, you know, I guess just how have we not seen that before? I'm pretty sure I have not seen that before. Where does it come from?
Through the chair, this is something that comes out of our asset management plan for roading. So this is around how we prioritise that funding bid that sits in the back there, and around how we're spending the money versus maintenance versus complete renewals. So a lot of the big spike in the urban roads is around the massive AC program that we rolled out last year and the year before with our provincial growth funding. So when we put out about $5 million worth of AC in the urban area, you haven't seen the corresponding jump in the rural roads yet because we haven't got all of that roads they haven't been back and rescored to get the back that we want to, and we hadn't rolled it out when we're done to take in the challenge, the review here. I'll have to check it's done annually, so I'll have to go back and find out when it is that it's going to be rolled out again.
Sorry, supplementary to that, when it's rescored, can we have it presented in that format? Cool, thank you.
And I just had one last question on page 33 or 56 of the agenda. How much of that budget will be spent before year end? Because we're still talking about 21, 22. Are we going to end up spending all of that money? Because I see in some other places we've had some carryovers. So are we going to get 48, 2.14 million spent?
Through you, Madam Chair, we're very much on track with our provincial growth funding. So that is absolutely in train. We're on track with everything we've said we'll spend on through there. If anything, we're slightly ahead.
Thank you. And could we have a cow in the picture on page 28? That says our land area. There's not 42% of it just in sheep, and there's a little model that has a cow and a sheep together. So could you pull up that?
Hang on. We also don't have 36% in houses.
Other, yeah.
Yeah, we'll change the.
Thank you. So is there someone prepared to recommend was a modification with respect to the matters raised by Mr. Gaddam? Not hearing the comment made by Mr. Tupra, and one or two other corrections. That one of the committee prepared to move that this be recommended to council. So the recommendation has changed from what appears on page. Let me find it. We are recommending. This committee does not have the power to recommend to the public, we need to recommend to council. So we approve, the committee can, the Regional Transport Committee approve the draft Gisborne Regional Land Transport Plan 2021 to 31 for recommendation to council, subject to minor amendments. Someone prepared to move? Thank you. Move, Ms. Bates. Seconded, councillor Cranston. All those in favour, who have a vote, please say aye. Thank you. So we move to, sorry, page 88, which is the second document. The Regional Land Transport Plan on public transport. Would you like to just outline, Ms. McIntosh, any particular aspects of it?
Sure. So the Regional Public Transport Plan, it's also a legislative requirement that we review it around the same time as the Regional Land Transport Plan. There, as alluded to earlier, the main priority that we've indicated is the strategic network review, but following from that, we'll be looking at further works in that area. I don't think there's any, obviously the recommendation is needs to be amended in the same as the last time one, that would be like the Regional Transport Committee recommends to council the approval for consultation. Consultation is also planned for the same time as the Regional Land Transport Plan and the long-term plan.
Are there any questions about that? I'll just start it with a question on page 106, and it just relates to those total mobility trips. We've talked about those dropping off substantially. Do we have any idea what was different between 2004 to 2008, when there was a substantially more use of the mobility service? Is it that there are more options now? Or
I
put a lot of money and a lot of effort into something that the public obviously aren't happy with. So what was better about it or different in people's circumstances?
I'm not clear about what the change was for the total mobility. So that's the subsidised taxi fares for people that are eligible. My understanding, well, there are suggestions that the subsidy has remained the same despite the fact that taxi fares have increased, and that could be a barrier for people, for some users. But I personally don't know the details or the history of it.
Are we going to ask in the course of the review? I mean, any further questions with respect to that paper? Mr. Tupra.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. In terms of the vision, which I sort of noticed in terms of the other draft plan, and correct me if I'm wrong, they both seem to read more like a mission statement, whereas the vision, as I understand it, and I'm not a planner, and neither am I a strategist like you people, but my understanding of a vision is something that's kind of visionary. I know that sounds pretty basic, but that's my understanding. And both of the, with all due respect, both of those vision statements don't seem to read that way to me. For me, I leave it at that because through the public consultation, no doubt there'll be stuff that will come through anyway. So just a comment in regards to that. But hey, I wasn't aware of this plan, and I'd like to, for the record, commit to assisting in terms of what I'm doing with the other plan, in terms of a multicultural perspective as well as environmental, where I can. So I'll just liaise with you, your staff directly on that. Sure.
Any further comments? Otherwise, is someone prepared to move? Moving, Councillor Burdett. The recommendation is amended to that we approve the draft Gisborne Regional Public Transport Plan 2021 recommended to GDC for consultation, subject to any amendment. No. Seconder, please. Councillor Worsnop. Any further questions? All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary carried. Thank you. So we move to Page 119, thank you. Ms. Spate. Thank you very much, Ms. McIntosh.
Okay, so probably a relatively brief update this month. So in terms of the National Land Transport Program development, we're looking at the moderation of all of the proposals that have come through for improvements in low cost, low risk and continuous programs. So it's the business as usual activities. And then we'll provide feedback on those in March. So that's just continuing the iterative process of looking at everything on the national level. And then we have received a number of submissions on the Wakakatahi investment proposal. So this was the information about what's proposed for the State Highway Network. And we are responding. So there's been, I've seen a draft letter to come back to GDC to respond to the feedback that the team's provided. So that's led to a number of amendments to that proposal. Non-state highway activities, so these are things like the road safety programs and the public transport, walking and cycling and so on. And so again, we go through those nationally and look through where everything's got to as part of the process. So once that's been completed, we'll come back to everyone and let you know where that's got to. Further updates coming through our COVID-19 regional information. So we've got employment modelling that we used for Arataki version 2, and we're now looking at what we've learnt in the 10 months since the pandemic, and we'll be publishing that information as well. So we have seen changes to travel patterns, and while in many cases volumes are back up to pre-COVID, the patterns of travel have changed, particularly in urban areas where we're seeing, for example, less traffic on Mondays and Fridays as people working from home more now that they have established work from home practices, and normal pre-COVID level or higher on other days. So we're watching to see what happens with those, and where we get other insights, we flow those through as well and let people know what we found. We announced last year that we would be starting a 30-year plan to really be thinking about the long-term context, the longer-term challenges that we see around both population growth and climate change. But we have had to defer this work, so we won't be updating you until later in the year on that. We were hoping to have been working on that in the first half of this year. One of the things that we are able to start releasing are some of the case studies about where we have put new safety good analytics to back up the interventions that we are putting in place and demonstrating where we're seeing results. So it's not just the anecdotal assessment, but we've got the research there to back it up, and we're putting these on our website so that they're available for people to use and to provide further information to communities about why we use particular interventions. So there's 3 up there now around the intersection speed zones, raised safety platforms and rural roundabouts. We've also got some introductory video resources to help start to articulate the role that all the different people involved with the transport system can play in reducing deaths and serious injuries on the road. And this will be part of this new program of work as we start really engaging in what it's going to take to deliver the drop in trauma through deaths and serious injuries over the next 30 years. Updates in this region, the Tainui Bridge, we have the site blessing, I think, on Friday. So that's great, getting that widening underway. And all things are now lined up and ready to go. The Tairāwhiti roading package, obviously we've got quite a bit of work there, and all of that is continuing. So that's just the overview slide and the specific updates here. So the passing opportunities work on State Highways 2 and 35. We've got one site complete, one under construction, and 2 more starting this month. And you can look on the website for the GIS map, which shows which sites are underway. And State Highway 35 resilience, we've got multiple sites being designed and sites are being surveyed to get underway in March. So really pleased to see those gearing up. Waikato Gorge, we're doing the final steps to get the detailed business case to the board, and then we can look at where we could start any property acquisition, and also look at funding for when we schedule funding in for the full project. State Highway 2 Napier to Apotiki, we've got the 5 bridges through the Waiwika Gorge, and we're progressively working through those at the moment.
Benefit what working through them means, because there's actually nothing happening on bridges in the Waiwika Gorge at the minute, and the paper says 6, and you just mentioned 5. And
One's already been completed.
right, so what is working through them? They're going to be done and they're still in the planning stage, or can you just clarify what that means?
Do you have the actual time frame for them, Helen?
Yes, through the chair, the first one is going to start within the next 3 months. It's actually, the working through it basically means we're in the planning stage of notifying the stakeholders and also about what the traffic management implications are going to be. So we've got our first meeting next Tuesday about that.
How many are in our region and how many are in Potiki's region? Do we know?
Yep, through the chair, the whole of the Waiwika Gorge is through the Bay of Plenty region, but it's being delivered from our office.
Thanks. But it is of interest to our listeners and readers because of the amount of use. Thank you. Sorry.
So we have the Makamuka Bridge replacement, which we're still waiting completion of cultural impact assessment, and then we can go through to the next phase of securing funding once that's been completed and we have the consenting process underway. And State Highway 2 Motu Bridge, just the final minor items being completed this month. Obviously summer is our big road maintenance period, so there's been rehabilitation work and reseal work happening right across the network, and that continues through to late February, subject to weather obviously, but it's all been going well to schedule as far as I understand. And we had the Tairāwhiti deployment package, so we have the displaced workers have been working on those road maintenance activities and will continue through to that completes. Speed, so we have the several different sections. So the Te Puia Springs Township, we're just finalised all the feedback from consultation, so we should be getting that through the internal decisions so that we can make an announcement on that section. And then we have the 2 sections, so State Highway 35 Apotiki to Gisborne and State Highway 2 Apotiki to Gisborne. So we're looking at both of those and taking on board some feedback. We've had to really consider how residents are using those full journeys, so thinking about the full journey and the impact that any changes would have, and ensuring that all people impacted by that can have the input. So we're just working through both the technical assessment that we're required to do and also how we can maximise opportunities for community to participate in that consultation process. And obviously State Highway 2 is, again, slightly different corridor in terms of the use and the stakeholders for that. So we need to make sure we tailor that one as well. Emergency works, we've got 3 sites that are down to single lane under temporary traffic management, and all of those we're looking at starting, or the first 2 are starting very soon, and we've got the 2 consents all locked in now, which is fantastic, so we can get underway, and one will be later on this year, and we've got 10 other sites that we're still working through the plans for treating them. So that's the standard update, and I can pause there. I've got a request for an update on the One Network rating classification, so I've got a separate short presentation on that as well.
Are there any questions to Ms. Spate with respect to that update?
No, I thought it would start from me, the amount of work that's going on up there. 2 questions, Emma. Corporal Hill above, I did ask Helen earlier, above the Waipio turnoff, and Gudgeon's Hill above Tigety. They're in a shocking state and have been for a long time. I noticed, as I said earlier, toilets in terms of the roading that's being resealed, and some of them are being ripped up, supposedly better roads put down. But those works have been outstanding since last winter. They were prepared almost to seal stage and then left, and right at present, they're a mess. And this is a state highway. So I mentioned this to Helen earlier, because over the Christmas period, New Year period, people well understand. Hundreds, if not thousands, come back to the coast. And some of the communities I attend, I've had flea in the ear over this, thinking that I'm the magic wand. So all I want to know is, so I can pass it on, because the Mayor and I are on the radio on Monday, when this work will be done.
Helen, do you have information on those specific sites?
It's the 10 that are included in your update. The 10 other sites under TTM due to subsidence, we're working through the plan. We've set the community expectation already on these, that they are going to be, these are significant issues on our network, and we are working through those. So we've been very clear about the expectation that these are not going to be quick fixes.
Trust, through you, Madam Chair, trust Helen before the winter.
There's no commitments, Bill. As I've said, we've set the community expectation that these are long-term sites that we are managing.
If I can be through you, Madam Chair, if I can be facetious. When we had Marafi roads in place, prior to Christmas, every year for the last 5 years, both the Corporal and Gudgeon's Hill were attended to. I was told our officer, or the manager, did things out of order. But the point is, this is Highway 35. It's a main highway. It shouldn't be left in abeyance like that for so long.
Thank you, Councillor Burdett. If there's no further comment, that report from Waka Kotahi recommendation was for noting of that report. Is someone prepared to move? Councillor Burdett, seconded. Councillor Cranston. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Carried. Thank you. Now, there has been a query with respect to the status of State Highway 2, which was discussed at a planning meeting at a high level on the Waiwika Gorge. So I have asked Ms. Spate to come to us with some information around the potential amendment of the state, working to achieve a higher status rating of State Highway 2 from currently remind me, to a regional road. Currently
It's arterial.
Arterial to a regional road.
Okay, so just to give you the context for this, The One Network Road classification, or ONRC, was developed by the Roading Efficiency Group on behalf of all road controlling authorities. So that's jointly by councils and Waka Kotahi. And it divides our roads into 6 categories based on how busy they are, whether they connect to important destinations or are the only route available, and what kind of activity they have on them. And so we have the 6 categories there. Oops. National, arterial, regional, primary collector, secondary collector, and access. All this is available on our website. The functional classification then drops down into a level of detail that's very difficult to see, but I'll just pull out the relevant information for you, which is the primary collector criteria is typical daily traffic of between 1,000 and 3,000 vehicles a day. Heavy vehicle daily flows around 150, 6 buses or 300 people an hour. And then it goes through population as well, linking places with population over 2,000. Arterial has to have a typical daily traffic of between 3,000 and 5,000, with heavies over 300, 15 buses or 750 people an hour, and linking places 10,000 population. And then the regional is 10,000 to 15,000 vehicles a day and over 400 heavies and 40 buses or 2,000 people an hour. I just went from smallest to biggest.
Yes, exactly.
National arterial, oh, they've actually got, it's around the wrong way. Yes.
Which one is the wrong way?
The text on the first slide, the table's correct. So regional is the higher volume than arterial. Also available on the website, I won't go through in detail, is some more descriptive information about the criteria and thresholds. So it's all a technical process that we go through. And then when we come to the roads in this region, the bottom map, which is also available on our website, shows that State Highway 35 is classified as a primary collector. State Highway 2 South is classified as regional. And State Highway 2 North to Opotiki is classified as arterial. And when we go through and look at the data here, so I've just pulled out the data behind that classification, we can see that the key volumes there are under 3,000 vehicles a day. So that puts it at primary collector level, so it's a level lower than it currently sits. The number in terms of heavy commercial vehicles is at 283, which sits in the arterial area. And so it was lifted up into arterial because of its importance to Gisborne. But those volumes are, so the default category would be primary collector based on the assessment. If we just compared it on grounds of the data, it was lifted to arterial in recognition of how significant the road is for the Gisborne region. But to lift it to regional, where it's expected to have volumes between 10 and 15,000 per day, and over 400 heavies per day, there is no way that we could justify shifting it on that basis, because it wouldn't fit with that whole national structure which we have for all routes. And also we would then still be unable to actually justify the investment, because the investment still has to be made on a business case that takes into account the volumes and the activity on the route. So
How old is that data, please?
I don't have the actual data on that data, but I can't imagine from the discussions I've had that it would be significantly different, and certainly it wouldn't be in the range of the regional classification.
It's really interesting. Thank you. I'll just ask a question about heavy transport operators. Well, do you have a perspective on the volumes? Because it's interesting to see that going south is regional, which was out of that. I think Steve was at the meeting where we had some discussion around this. Do you have a view about the volumes of traffic that your team experienced on the route going south relative to the route going north? Thanks, Cam. Mr. Gilmore?
I've actually looked at not so much on the route going south, because it doesn't really fit as much, but the 35, I've looked at the numbers on there, because I thought that may fit in the next category. But yeah, it doesn't. Just to try and trip, to the next level.
Mr. Wetherell, do you have any comment to make on any perception that your company had? But no comment on the route going north. Mr. Toogood.
Interested in the part of the criteria referring to the importance. I would have thought that State Railway 2 from Opotiki to Gisborne's a lifeline, isn't it? I would have thought that in itself must give it more significant weighting than just numbers of vehicles. Because as we know, when the gorge got closed for a while there, the impact it had on I don't know what the numbers were, the council people would know, on our economy, but it's a lifeline. It's more than just being of importance to us. So just my thoughts or whakaaro on that.
Councillor Worsnop?
Can I just ask why it matters? Because just purely driving these roads, there doesn't seem to be any difference between the one that's considered regional and the one that's considered arterial. Admittedly, the primary collector one's pretty rubbish, but what's the difference between the other two?
Well, it does feed into the funding models for the standard programs for those roads. Because as you get increased volumes and increased heavies, obviously the maintenance regime shifts.
They're entitled to more maintenance, not necessarily a better road.
Well, the investment in the road, any upgrades to roads is assessed on its specific merits. So if we're going to do realignments and things like that, those are all assessed on their merits, and the use of the road is factored in as part of those business cases. Just on the data, it's 2019 data.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for getting that information for us anyway. Is there any other comment on that? Thank you. I have no further items.
Given that we're all trying to drive less with the Climate Commission's new report, how does attempting to have less traffic affect our ability to attract investment?
That opens a quite broad discussion on the sustainability of the funding model for the National Land Transport Fund, because obviously the shifts in the types of journeys that are made and the mode of journeys does change the way we invest, but obviously we still need to have a transport system and a road network that is safe and fit for purpose. The government's policy sets the way the funding is split across the National Land Transport Fund, and then we're assessing that nationally in terms of how we maintain and invest in capital upgrades, whether it's for roads or for alternative modes. So while the big picture will shape some of that, we're then still looking at how we invest right across the country in a way that's consistent. So we are still looking at if overall volumes stayed the same or dropped, we're still looking at comparing relative use and maintenance as a result of that. So we're still looking at that on a national basis.
Thank you. Councillor Crenson, you did raise one matter this morning that you wish to raise. Do you still wish to raise that matter of the Waitangi footpath?
Yeah, I wasn't sure where to raise it. Just I have had a few calls about the Whether it's been done by the Harmon Maple Stream, and people sort of, it appeared by surprise. I mean, I live over the road and I was quite surprised to go around and see it happening. People are wanting justification, and I think the justification they're looking for is how is that prioritised when it seems to be something that's nice to have rather than essential. I mean, essentially the pathway that's going there is 2 metres away from the existing pathways and parallel to it.
So through the chair, that's a GDC project, that one. So underneath the Hamaratua bridge there, the footpath didn't connect at all. So if you came down from the Okatu side, on the side of the road there, you came down a concrete path, then underneath the bridge, it just hit the grass. So the issue we were having was in winter, kids coming through on bikes and trying to push wheelchairs, pushchairs through there. It used to get quite muddy. So part of the reason that kids were shooting across the road is because they didn't want to go underneath the footpath because they couldn't ride their bikes through, or they didn't want to ride through because it was muddy. So part of what we've done is connected up to the car park there. So you can now safely transit from either side of the state highway on the footpath by a scooter, skateboard, bike, and be able to get across underneath that bridge rather than having to cross that road. So it connects not just the school to Okitu, but also if kids from Okitu want to get to the bus stop, they can go underneath the bridge and walk back up, which is why it hooks back up to get to where it goes parallel. So it's a short stretch, but it was just a bit that we were noticing that kids were not utilising that footpath, and part of the rationale and for the community out there was very much around, well, it ends in a muddy bog, which is why they wanted it tidied up.
Yeah, I don't know if I absolutely agree with how it's going to function there. I think there's a lot easier ways of doing it, but that's just a personal view. But prioritisation of that, I mean, we knew nothing about it. I mean, I'm getting calls, so I wandered down there and see there's been work going on there for 3 weeks or so. It's taking like 6 weeks, and there's, you know, so I mean,
Mr. Paul has raised a matter previously.
Through the chair, I know Downer did notify the school. Downer undertook the works on behalf of us, so the school was notified. There was something that went out on the Facebook page, and they did letter drops for the immediate houses surrounding them. So that's how it was put out and rolled out, and it was just a minor improvement as part of our minor improvements budget that we have.
Thank you. If there's no further questions in the room, I'll thank everybody for your participation today. Thank you for helping to get the long-term regional transport long-term plan to the stage that it's at. I apologise if it seems a slightly frustrating process and that there's a limited opportunity for real change, but thank you very much anyway for everyone's participation. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Bowman.